As you all know, generative AI disrupted the creative industry pretty drastically in the past 3 years. But we want to make sure that our students are equipped with the knowledge of how to use AI and what these tools are made of, which will be part of the conversation for today as well. And a lot of us here today, well, all of us are faculty, and we teach these in our courses. We enable our students to learn to incorporate both data and AI in their workflow. So our mission at the Creative AI Hub is enabling creatives, designers, artists, researchers, and students with the power of artificial intelligence and data science through collaboration, communications, and creativity. The few things that we usually offer is we have our annual Creative AI Symposium. We just had our 3rd annual symposium in April, and we will have the next one, the 4th one, in next April. It's always April because it aligns with our semesters better. And we bring artists who showcase their work and the ones that they use AI or they have experimented with AI, as well as researchers who are presenting their work. We also have AI Sandbox. So these are photos from our last symposiums. But a bit about our sandbox is actually a safe space that we do have a few workstations right behind this wall. We have a few workstations that allows for you to submit your projects and experiment with models, but safely. You don't have to upload your data to any of the available corporate version of AI. So we have models on the machines. You could use your data privately and develop niche models for your use cases. We also do AI Clinic monthly so that we have a smaller, more focused conversations with individuals who would like to take advantage of these experimentation but may not have the knowledge of which tool to use. We have AI experts in-house. David is sitting in the back, and they're actually managing our server workstations and also give advice on what tools to use and how to incorporate those. So we are creating spaces for really exploration of new AI tools that are out there for our faculty students, but it's also open to any other researcher who's interested in exploring that. And so basically we cover research as a practice in our faculty, but also we have a lot of courses taking advantage of these sandboxes. We partner with external organizations, and we are always looking for, like, we collectively apply for different type of funding, and we do have companies that are kind of coming out of the type of work that is being done. If you want to know more, you can actually connect to our website. We have a lot of information on it, and you can just email me or the Creative AI, torontomeu.ca, our email address. I also want to just briefly show what we have on our website, because if you go here, we have information about our symposium, sandbox, and AI clinic. But what is hopefully useful to some of you here is we do have Learn More About AI for Creatives, which opens another document. And basically, it's a 2-3 page, very small summary of what we're going to talk about today, which is like, what is machine learning? There is just a small summary if any of you are interested. It's just a paragraph of summary and some useful links, both about traditional machine learning, generative AI, agentic AI, and we will explore some of that with you today. It also touches on the challenges that we are facing, or the creative industries are facing. And I know a lot of them are top of mind for you, especially the policy and the ethics that has been important or sticky conversation topics. So there are some links that you could explore on our website. However, this panel today is the first panel of a 3-panel series, which the first one we are hosting at the Creative AI Hub, which focuses on what is AI and how you incorporate that in your artistic workflow. And then the next one will be at U of T around AI and ethics. And the third one would be in collaboration with OCAD, which is AI and policy. So if you're really, really passionate about those 2 topics, I'm sure you can still benefit from the general conversation today, but I would potentially direct the specific questions around ethics and policy for those panel conversations. And today we are hopefully exploring what the AI is, what are some of the use cases that our faculty have been doing and experimenting with in their workflow. I know I'm talking a lot, and I do have, like, you might see that I have a lot of slides, but we want to get to know you a bit better. So I have created a poll, and you could, I would go to the present mode, and you could scan the QR code on the screen and tell us about your profession. Which professions are you coming from? Are you an artist, designer, musician, or anybody else? Students, writers? It gives us a little bit more context for today so that we tailor our responses to what matters to you most. Okay, we're getting responses. Fantastic. And artists and students are winning right now, which makes sense. We are still at the university, so I'm glad that our students are joining. Fantastic. Okay, my next question is, sorry, let me just go to my next question. Which is, how much are you actually engaging with AI? So to give you a bit more context, yes, go ahead. To give you a bit of context, I think our 3-panel series was in response to a survey that came out of Mass Culture, and it showed 60% of artists actually refuse to use AI. The other 40%, some are curious, some are experimenting, and some are adopting some of the AI tools, but the majority of people actually do not use AI as much. Okay, so for our people here, we are in the other 40%, which is great, fantastic. So that's why we wanted to open up the conversation to really dig into what AI is, to encourage the proper adoption of the tools, whatever that works for you all. And thank you for the responses. I wanted to first, I do have one more question for you all, so don't put your phones away. But before opening that question, I wanted to show you what is it that we're going to talk about today. There are like 4 major questions we are covering, which basically the generative AI and AI feels a little bit different than other technological advances. It feels like very it doesn't feel that we have a lot of control on. So we wanted to first focus on what actually is happening under the hood. And for that, we do have our experts with slides. So you will see a few more slides from us. But then after that, we will try to minimize the conversation from us to you and through the slides, but make it a more conversation. The second question we will talk about is what is kind of the use cases for the AI? How is it being incorporated? Because a lot of people are really worried, concerned about the loss of human creativity, and this would allow us to explore using AI as a pure generative tool or as a collaborative tool, and what are the examples that can kind of be good examples to use in your workflow. And then the third one, the last two questions that we are kind of covering, and it could be in any of the areas that you might be more interested in. So what are some of the interactions, because people are also concerned about the loss of human creativity and culture. So we wanted to look at it from what are the data that these models are being trained on, and does that feel like collaborating with other artists, or does it feel like collaborating with just something completely technological? But I will come back to these questions at a later time, one by one, and I think we do have quite a lot of time to cover them. It also maybe touches a little bit on how to enter the market now that it's very much shifted towards new batch of technologies. So you know what the questions that we have talked about, we're going to talk about, but I also wanted to make sure we give this opportunity because it is going to be a conversation, and I do want to make sure that we cover what is important to you. So I will leave this poll open for the duration. So it's an open-ended question. If there are burning questions that it has not been covered in those 4 questions, please, along the panel, put them in, and I will go through them and I'll ask them. But again, it's not the only way. We also can, you can also raise your hand and ask your questions along the way, and we will address them as it comes along. But if you feel strongly about writing it down, it will allow other people also to see your questions and upvote them and maybe edit them and add their own version of it. So I will leave this open, but I'll move to our actual panel. So to our first question, as I mentioned, AI feels different from other software products because it generates output we didn't explicitly program. And my question to the panelists is, how do you explain the difference between a traditional computer program and a neural network to someone who works in clay, paint, and musical notes? What is actually happening under the hood when a model learns an artistic style? And here are our panelists in random orders. I'm sure you can guess who's who. And I'm not going to introduce them individually. So whoever gets to answer the question, I'm hoping that they will take a few minutes and introduce their role, their expertise, and then answer those questions for you. With that, I will hand it over to Dr. Lachman.
Thanks. Yeah, you probably all have facial recognition on your phones anyway and can identify us. That's what we're supposed to be talking about. I wanted to talk a little bit about AI, and it's great to see how many of you are using. Of course, it's incredibly common. From my 16-year-old is trying to talk her friends through why you shouldn't use ChatGPT to compose a breakup text to someone. First, you shouldn't break up by text is the first lesson, but we're all using them with varying levels of worry, sometimes varying levels of surprise and delight, and also varying levels of understanding. And that's not that unusual. Most of us use tools every day. I don't know how my car works exactly, But AI is a little bit different in that it does seem to engender, we're working in a world where it feels like it's doing a lot of things that I am not in charge of anymore. It has a lot in it under the hood that is being trusted to make decisions. And so I wanted to just start by just demystifying a little bit. And some of this may be obvious to a lot of you. I think you're at various levels of familiarity. And to my colleagues, if I'm wrong or outright lying, please just let me know. But I wanted to say AI isn't magic, right? I mean, it is built on some standard techniques that there's huge amounts of scale being put into how it's doing what it's doing, but some of the principles can be understood a little bit. And the first is, that AI is being folded into so many tools we use. So that I've seen slides saying, I do know some artists who flat out refuse to use it, but that's getting harder and harder to do because it's built into everything. It's built into Photoshop. It's built into music editing software. It's built into recommendation software. But the core that I want to talk about is traditional computing is built with rules, traditional software that you use. Somebody decided when this happens, this other thing happens. AI is following patterns. In some cases, that software was able to notice in what was there. And in some cases, humans, as a layer on top, were able to say, I like what you did here and not what you did here. But a lot of times, AI is looking for following patterns that it notices in something, unsupervised. You hand it a whole bunch of text, a whole bunch of images, a whole bunch of music, and it notices patterns on its own. And then from that, we noticed, and to the surprise of many of the researchers who built these tools, it did useful things from it. No one said, hey, if you see this, do this. And there's a difference there. The difference is the difference between control and automation. I talk about the difference between sometimes personalization and customization. Customizing is like you get in a car, I get in the car after my teenager has been driving, and I have to adjust it. I have to choose to move the seat closer, adjust all the mirrors. It's highly configurable, but I get to choose what it's doing to make it right for me. Personalization is when something watches you and tries to guess what it is you want or what it is you're doing. And that can be powerful. I don't have to fiddle around and adjust everything, but it also means built into that system, it's making a whole bunch of decisions that are invisible to me. So that's challenging because everything that's designed are encoded with beliefs about human behavior. And maybe it's right, and maybe it's wrong. Maybe it's built on top of biases. Maybe it's built on top of rules that I don't agree with. But that's very hidden to me. At the core of these systems, I mean, I think there are a ton of questions we're going to get into probably here about AI, but what I want to start with is if you understand a little bit about how AI works, I think we'll be better at all of these questions. We'll be better at what do I want to trust? What do I want to control? How do I want to let my kids interact with this? How do I want government regulation to work in this? How do I want my own practice to work with this? It helps if we understand a little bit of what's under the hood. And the basis of this, computers describe everything with numbers. Yeah. So that's anything that's text, computers turn those into numbers, right? You have words, and it will turn them into a series of numbers. Colors are just a series of numbers. And so, we are very familiar with adjusting these things, and they become human understandable outputs. The computer doesn't know that this is a more vivid red than another red, and doesn't know what red signifies. It knows some numbers. That's there in images, or just a collection of numbers. So each one of these pixels can have a color set to it, but the computer, it's just a row of a bunch of values, numbers. And it doesn't know what they mean, but humans are the ones who are projecting this meaning on top of it, all the way through to sound. So I don't know if this will... sound is not available, but it's also just a series of numbers, and by adjusting the numbers, we can make very different, different kinds of sounds, even to the point of making things that sound like words, but they're just a collection of a few different numbers, and you make an effect, a waveform that sounds like going ooh or ah. And then people were able to experiment with this back in the 60s, making things that sound like human speech just by mucking with the waveforms of numbers. And it sounds magical, but it is really just a collection of numbers. So if computers describe everything with numbers, AI goes one step a little bit further in that it describes everything with vectors. And if you reach back to math class, vectors are just a collection of numbers, a few numbers together. So instead of one letter being one number, I might have a word be described by a couple of different numbers. And if you're looking at so if I was talking about an animal, like a bear, there could be a bunch of values that I'm looking at. How big is it? How scary is it? And if I compare a bear to a rabbit, on the big factor, a rabbit's smaller than a bear is big. In terms of scariness, a bear is more scary than a rabbit is scary. These senses, scary, big, these are human-readable concepts. The computer doesn't know what scary means. The computer doesn't know what big means. But it can vary and say, for this word, concept, bear, I don't know what a bear is, but it's high in the category of bigness. It's high in the category of scariness. It's high in the category of hairiness, like a bunny. It's maybe not as fast. And these human projections are on top of these. So you can look at different animals here. You can look at different instruments. And when you have a few of these categories, it's able to now vary what I'm looking at. And so if you imagine kind of a 2D graph, and there are maybe two things I'm looking at, how big it is and how hairy it is. And I can plot somewhere. Bigness and hairiness for my bear is over here. Smallness and hairiness for my rabbit is over here. And so now I can have these two concepts in relation to one another. Computer still doesn't know what a bear is or a rabbit, but when I'm looking at these concepts, I can actually put them and plot them in relation to one another. And when I can do this kind of thing, I can actually make magic things happen. So these vectors I can relate to one another. And so what we've done with AI systems is we feed it a whole bunch of words. And these concepts, big, hairy, fast, slow, the computer doesn't know what these mean. It's coming up on its own with different categories and plotting. When I see the word rabbit in a sentence, it's usually used with other words that are close, that also signify fast or smallness. And when I use the word bear, it's with other words that signify hairiness and ferociousness. And so I start to cluster, imagine still on my 2D graph, bear and words that are kind of like bear over here, and bunny and words that are about cuteness and Easter and hopping over here. And so now I can realize these words have something in common with each other, even though the computer doesn't know what words mean. It just knows when I've seen this word's near it. And when I see this word's near it. Now imagine instead of my 2D graph, I have a 6 billion axis graph, or even 4 or 5 or 6. And the categories on them, bigness, hairiness, no person sat down and wrote those. On its own, just by reading lots and lots of text, the computer was able to cluster patterns near each other, words that seem to be close to each other here. And that's really what your AI system is doing. It looked at huge amounts of text, or music, or images, and on its own, like unbelievably massive numbers of these, and processing, it's able to cluster numbers near each other. So it turns a word into a number, it puts a number here, turns another word into a number, and because of where it was in a sentence, it puts it here. And you do that enough, and you actually get a reliable sense where words can cluster with one another. And when we have this, we can now do things like this. This is a vastly simplified version of what an AI system. Like AI, when you've used them, you can say anything to an AI and it kind of seems like it understands what you want because it has millions and millions of words in its system. This is a very tiny system that has 10,000 words in it. And this is, from 2016, Word to Vec it's called. And so it's doing this positioning. Where's a word in relation to other words? So if I type in a word like, I'll make it clear how not good this is, cat. It's showing all the words that are related to cat of the 10,000 words it's looked at. It clearly, the 10,000 words it has doesn't have the word cat like an animal in it because, maybe it does here, but not a lot of them. It doesn't have a lot of animalness. It has words like catalog or classification or things near it. And you can see them in relation to one another. But if I type a word like spice into here, which it does have in it. So I can see words related to spice. And if I zoom in, you can see there's words like fruit related to spice, like maybe seeds, flowers are related to spice. And over here on the right, it's showing all the words that when it read in the text it was trained on, the words that happen to be near spice. Like, you can see things like seeds or extract. It also has girls, Spice Girls, right? And in my graph, spice is connected to girls, but not in the same little cluster that is about seeds. Spice Girls is over here, and Spice and Girls are there, but next to words like pop and Bananarama and music and other things in the 80s. So it can have a similar concept because spice is just a number. It doesn't know what it should mean. And by clustering them, we're able to do these relationships of clusters to one another. And that's where the magic of it understands what I mean comes from. It's able to predict, well, if this word is here based on patterns, what other words are related to it? And every time you type a question into your ChatGPT, it's predicting what an answer should be. It does not understand what you were saying. When you say, what is the capital of Canada? It doesn't know that Ottawa is the capital of Canada. No one made the rule. When you do a search on Google, there's a website that might say that. And if you look it up in an encyclopedia, someone who wrote, Ottawa is the capital of Canada. When you do the search, it's just saying of all the sentences I've looked for and the patterns I've looked for, when someone types that, what's the usual words that appears next to it? And it happens to be Ottawa. Sometimes that could be wrong. Like maybe I'm talking about a fictional Canada that I made in a book in my own head, and it would be wrong. But most of the time in the statistics, that's what it's trying to do here. So this lets us do some interesting things here. So cat and kitten might be near each other, and rocket might be far away in the cluster. This is a very famous one from 10 years ago. It allows us to do math on these, because they're just numbers. Again, the computer only knows numbers, not meanings. So in this graph, if you take the concept of king, wherever it is on the graph, and you subtract the concept of man, and add the concept of woman, the words that are nearby is the concept of queen. That's a little weird, but basically it means you can move around in space to go and say, okay, take away the concept of maleness from this. Like move away from the concept of king by the concept of man, move over into the concept of woman, and what you'll end up with is understanding that the concept there for a word is there. It lets us do this kind of weird math to come up with concepts that seem like understanding. And remembering, it doesn't know what any of these concepts mean. It really just turned the concept of king into a bunch of numbers that positioned it somewhere, and then it has man over here, and it moves away from that a certain amount, and moves away a certain amount, and then it turns that back into a human-readable thing, like a number. And of course, all of these have biases built into them, concepts of gender, concepts of meaning built into this, but that came from not someone choosing it. It came from the text it was trained on. So in my little vector thing I was doing here about the Spice Girls, you'll notice other things in the words here. It has Spice Girls and sugar, but it also has Lito and Bene. If any of you are science fiction fans, this happened to have Dune, the book, trained in the training set. These are characters in Dune. Things that are trained on the internet have a lot more content from Reddit than you might in your head, have a lot more content from things that might be popular online but wrong. If you search on concepts, it's possible your ChatGPT will give you back concepts that say the Earth is flat. Because online, there's a lot of people talking about the Earth being flat, far more than they are in the real world. So it's not like someone has gone through and verified content. This is really trained at scale, and it's trying to get better and better at scale, but it means it's not answering your question based on truth, it's answering based on what would people say from the stuff I've seen before. And that's a helpful thing to still use it incredibly. It also means it sometimes can do things it hasn't seen before. Like if I've mapped these handwritten gestures, and this is a system trained on something, on handwritten digits from 0 to 8, and I'm linking those to maybe real numbers, it can do a pretty good job of recognizing a digit it hasn't seen before, because it just moves around in the space and can say there's a hole here where there's some other digit that should be there, and it can basically recognize things it hasn't seen before based on where they should be, where there should be a space here. So it can recognize a handwritten digit like this. So my last point, my point I want to make is the machine doesn't make meaning, people make meanings. And so pay attention to the person behind the curtain, unlike the Wizard of Oz. And there's people on both sides of this, right? Someone built the system, told it what to feed it in, with some ethical choices there about, are we going to respect copyright? What is important? What content is there? What did people say online? So there's people building it, and then there's people interpreting what's on the other side. Do I believe this? Do I trust it? Do I find it reliable? And there's all kinds of challenges we'll talk about, probably in some of this. Self-promotion, I'm not good at, but my publisher would kill me if I don't say I have a book that talks about some of these topics. The one thing I want to lay out, and maybe I'll just talk about 3 of these quickly, is a framework kind of saying, how do we as humans engage with these technological questions, not from a point of fear, but also not from a point of view of like, I'm just going to believe what the marketing copy says. And 3 things in particular that I think are relevant to the artist community. One is context matters. So my wife, who's an artist, has this saying that how things are built affects what is made. So the fact that things were built without a certain respect to copyright, labor in multiple countries, costs, the environment, that shapes some of the things that are the outputs and the ways we use this. And so if we're in a place where we're being told maybe AI use is incredible, it's going to cure cancer, it's going to solve climate change, but it's being sold to us and being used to generate harmful imagery. It's being used to essays being written in university classes. That context in which it's being sold actually shapes what it's, we should pay attention to what's actually being done with it. There's an opportunity cost. So anytime you use a tool to do it, you're not doing it another way. And I think in artistic practices for all of you as maybe senior artists, that's very different than a junior artist who hasn't learned to do something manually yet and hasn't learned the editing choices they want to make in a video or developing. And so jumping all the way to a final output, which is what AI lets you do with very little effort, prevents you from learning through effort. And I think that is something that's really a question I ask a lot. And the last is the idea of transparency. In what uses do you have? Is it okay to just type a prompt and have it spit back an answer without knowing what's inside? And are there cases where you want to know what's inside? Maybe it's because of intellectual property. Maybe it's because it's a government program and it's making decisions about admissions to this country. And maybe we have human rights that should be respected and rules that should be respected. And maybe using an AI in that state is very different. So I'm going to leave that there. I know it's only tangentially related, but hopefully my colleagues will bring us back to the earth. Thanks.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. That was great. While staying, Richard gave us a very in-depth understanding of how in general AI works, and I wanted to stay on this topic, but also go into a little bit more depth of potential applications of what are the tools that I know you mentioned a few of these things, like especially in the traditional way, machine learning. I think people were starting to know some of the tools. Like very common one is recommender system that is available on any of the platforms that you're using. And if you don't know what recommender systems are, is that algorithm that suggests what to watch next or what to read next. And that is a common use case that we are all now used to. So if Netflix doesn't recommend your next movie or TV series, people leave after 2 minutes of struggling. So it's a very, very advanced area right now, and I think people have been very, very comfortable offloading that decision that previously we would have made to a trusted algorithm. How trusted? Again, people decide. I've heard people developing a few different personas on their platforms, so that if they feel like just browsing, they would use one. If they really, really want to go back to their documentaries, they would use another. And they do the same thing in other social media platforms as well. So people have developed tools and techniques to adapt their behavior to the personalization and the personalized algorithms that are out there. And as Richard explained, these are, again, those algorithms are just a huge number of matrices that have many dimensions, and they observe what behavior you show, and also they know a lot about what device you're using, what has been your interest, or what time of the day, how do you interact with any of those? So collection of that data in a human brain is just impossible to hold, but with the amount of computational power that are out there, these algorithms build these huge vectors and matrices and fill up the blank of what you might like next. So that's how they're using it. But I think people have been pretty comfortable with the traditional machine learning so far. And it's just a shift to the generative AI and later on to agentic AIs that shifts the type of decision you're actually giving up. With the generative, it actually, based on the patterns that it creates, it allows you to fill in things in the future. So it observes some pattern and it creates the next text, the next image. And that is the area that it could potentially make mistakes. So the example of Richard saying king, removing the male and adding female, it gives you queen. But we have actually seen a lot of the issues coming up with if you give them doctor, removing the male, adding female, it ended up with a nurse, not a doctor. So those are the patterns that, again, we are not necessarily digging into biases and the challenge of the algorithms, but as you mentioned, there are a lot of things that are wrong online, and because the algorithms are being trained on information that is available publicly, it also picks up the biases that we have in our language and in our culture and perpetuates that. So being mindful of what kind of decision do we want to offload to some of those algorithms, whether it's traditional machine learning or generative AI or agentic AI, those are, I think, the ones that we want to be involved in. But knowing how these algorithms work makes it easier to get comfortable in having these discussions when you have the language nailed down and knowing what are the nitty-gritty details of how they work and the challenges that already exist. So I wanted to open up to the panelists and ask them to share some of the examples of maybe generative AI tools that they have been experimenting in and using, and maybe walk us through some of those applications of how they work and what would be the best practices so far that you have been taking advantage of or implementing. AJ, I'll pass it over to you, but if that mic doesn't work,
we'll figure it out. I think we're so far good. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Really appreciate you and everyone, all of my fellow panelists as well. I think this is, when it comes to AI, I'm very skeptical, and yet I use AI a lot in a lot of different use cases. And so I highlight that up front because I think it's important to notice that and also bring that to everyone's attention, because I'm not here to sell you on anything. I'm just showing you processes that I've done and I've been benefit from. The promise of AI, I wanted a universe where AI was doing my dishes, where it was collecting my trash, where it was doing all the drudgery work that is around the work that I actually want to pursue. Raise your hands here if people have had to put together a grant application. Raise your hands if you, okay, so a chunk of the room. Keep your hands up if you enjoy that process. Yeah, exactly. I don't think anybody really enjoys that, although Stacy over there, appreciate you. Stacy's awesome and helps us all out in the grant universe when it comes to that kind of work. But it's an important part of the process, getting that funding to be able to pursue those creative actions. I am somebody who absolutely hates social media, but 3 deans quartered me in a meeting a few weeks or months ago, and we're like, you have to be on social media because how else will people know about your work? And I'm like, I hate social media. I don't want to use that. And so this is where I'm like, I hate that drudgery. So there are these processes that exist that allow me to take advantage of these tools to be able to market my research, my work, and put it out there, because all of us here are artists, creatives, people who are pursuing knowledge in different formats. And I think a lot of us don't really enjoy that extra part. Maybe it's the promotional part. Maybe it's the grant application part. Maybe it's whatever part that is holding you back from creating more. And so that's what I've tended to use. One of the things that's a little bit different than other people's systems, like, for example, the popular ones that are OpenAI's ChatGPT, Claude from Anthropic, some of the other models, from example, Mistral from France. I look at these models and they're really interesting, but ultimately they're data harvesting collection systems, right? They're designed to take as much information about you as possible. And yes, as Dr. Lachman brought up, the customization, personalization debate, personalization gives you the ability to think that you're getting something that's perfectly tuned to you, but it's based on what another algorithm designed. You didn't choose those things. And so I think about this and I end up using a lot more localized language models. So for example, I have local models on my phone, I have them on my laptop, and I also have access through the Creative AI Sandbox to the models that are on those wonderful, powerful machines. Thank you, Dave. Appreciate you Dave. You're awesome. I think about this because I don't want to send off all my data to everyone else, but also I want to be able to test things. I come originally from the world of journalism where attribution matters. If these are taken from intellectual property that isn't my own, if these are generating content that isn't able to be traced back to the source, that's the whole point in many ways of journalism, those two questions. Where does this information come from, and can I trust it? And if I can't answer those questions myself as a journalist, well, that's a problem. And so I look at this in my processes as well when it comes to the work that I do. But I, for sure, love being able to set up a bunch of ideas onto a Google Doc or whatever I'm doing. And then I will be able to put that into a text file, or maybe I have it already in a text file, and feed that into a local system. This is something I think is really valuable because you can all of a sudden see the patterns and how they would emerge into a format that you might be interested in taking, but ultimately you retain your voice. So again, the way I look at my generative AI work is taking the drudgery out of the creative that you enjoy. And so, for example, I'm also part of the Canadian Society of Cinematographers, companion member. Thank you, Rick. Appreciate you, Rick. And I think one of the things is that when I'm working with students is that they'll have a hard time sometimes understanding the concepts of lighting. And so what I saw in my class for lighting and grip is that a few of them, with my permission and working with them and coaxing, they would create these particular scenes and they would try to light them using this kind of AI system that was available, because they were having a hard time connecting the concepts of how much exposure they would need for certain things to achieve. And all of a sudden, I saw that they got a lot better at this, and they'd be able to design these particular scenes out of it. What it didn't do was, here's a step-by-step plan to have a 3-point lighting plan that gets you this particular thing, because that doesn't work. But if it's used as a starting point to figure out where you want to go creatively, I think that's also very interesting to me. So I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to pass it back to my panelists over here. One last thing I'll say is also, I came into the industry, as many of us did, logging tapes for reality TV. Hours and hours of terrible footage that you would have to put into a computer and digitize, and then also write down what happened. Logging tapes is what it was known as. That job doesn't exist anymore. And I'm here to tell you, I'm glad about that, because that job is terrible. It was a lot of horrible moments that you realize that reality TV is so fake, but in many ways, it's such an interesting way of how things are edited together. But ultimately, it was sitting there for hours and coding in and writing what was happening in that moment. Now that could be happen in literally seconds. And so one of the things that I've done, and also worked with other students and other people as well, is that they find the process of editing, nonlinear editing, kind of difficult to grasp. Now we have text-based video editing, where they can literally, just like a Google Doc or a Word document, have the text that's automatically transcribed and be able to make cuts and edits based on that. That's a huge advantage for people that want to get their message out and share that vision with the world, but don't necessarily have those tools just as yet to get there. So again, like I said, thank you very much. I'll pass it back to my panel.
Thank you, AJ. I actually want to go back to you again. I know you had some of the great slides, and I think with the examples that you've shared, showing those might be useful. No, we're moving on.
I'll hang around afterwards. We can look at it on my computer too. We can go to the Creative AI sandbox, but I'll pass it back to my team.
Okay. Okay. So just staying on the applications and AI tools, I wanted to pass it to Nicole to maybe you talk about a bit of more other applications that you're using before we jump into the other questions.
Okay. Thanks, guys, for coming out today. I'm in the RTA School of Media. My area is sport media. I see where I live in a very interdisciplinary field. So I straddle the fence of sport management and communications with psychosocial aspects of sports. So I'll go from a conference like this or a session like this to a conference that looks something completely different and so on. So it's a pretty cool world to live in, but always the conversation of AI keeps coming up. For me, I'm going to go back a little bit. I came when I had 2 kids, 2 little ones. That's why my phone keeps going off and back to back. And so when I was off on my maternity leave and then I came back, AI had become front and center, and I returned to my role as an assistant professor with a lot of trepidation, concerns, a lot of unknowns as to what was going on, and more importantly, how do I ensure that my students are learning and are not submitting information that was AI generated. So did a little bit of soul searching to figure out how to rejig or reformat my classes in this new way. But at the same time, like understanding that AI is here and we have to figure out how to navigate in it. So I will come out and say, I was initially very anti-AI, and I've now shifted, and I would say like I'm a converter, but with high caution. And the understanding that I like to use the saying we say, boring for Mark Twain, but certainly when I'm working with athletes in the realm of sports psychology, is like, do the thing you fear the most, and the death of fear is certain. So I think there's a lot of like fear along the conversation of AI, and is it going to take my job away, or is it going to change the way like students are learning, and so on. And I think it's important to understand this landscape and understand the strengths and weaknesses and how to navigate within it. So that's kind of where I've sat with. There is another piece I'll close off with, which I wrestle with and I'm concerned with as it relates to AI. But how I use it personally often has like a research assistant. So if you go through grad school and if you go do your master's or do a PhD, you've got an advisor there that is there to guide you, and you can ping ideas off. You might even have colleagues that you work with. But sometimes you have these random ideas that like percolate in your head, and I like the idea that I can use AI to kind of converse with. Understanding, of course, that it is a sycophant. So meaning like it's going to tell you what you want to hear. So having that kind of, that lens and be able to push back on it. So I'll often use it in that realm of like kind of using ideas and going back and forth. Now, I do have to preface that my sister-in-law, who is a professor at Vanderbilt in neuropsychology, has been involved in AI from like day one. So she's huge like proponent with it, which would make like family get-togethers really interesting when I'd be like anti-AI and she was a huge proponent for it. But she's been able to like study it and has taken like a sabbatical to really become like an expert in this area as it relates to academia and can code. And so what she has provided for me is like a code that I will use. Say if I'm using with ChatGPT, that if I was doing a grant application, I could use it with the general ChatGPT, or I can use her code. And her code is directed for researchers. And so I get like some pushback, less sycophant perspectives, and more questioning. So I get a richer dialogue than if I have like the regular paid model and so forth. So for me personally, that's how I use it, as well as like things related to my little ones. I'll ask questions with what does this mean when they're doing that? But from as an educator with my students, I like to use it in the sense of how, one, having them understand like the reality that we're in, and perhaps the risks that it might propose to their or to their field, and kind of like, what are you going to do about it? So if this is like the landscape that we're in right now, how do you respond to it, right? Because there are some that would say that AI isn't going to replace jobs; it's going to replace those who don't know how to use AI. And I think part of using AI is not deferring to its response, but being smart enough to be able to push back and ask critical questions that it might like generate. Otherwise, it's not really useful. It's going to give you a more generic answer. It's going to make some errors and so forth. But if you're able to be wise enough to like see like some of the strengths and some of the weaknesses with it, I think it can push you further academically, both as a professor or as a student, and always, of course, being able to declare how did you use AI to get to where you are, if you are using it. Some other ways that I've used it, this went horribly wrong. I tried to use it for a capstone class where I made the assumption that they were well-versed with AI, and so I was trying to, as I was launching this class, trying to show them some of the big topics that are talked about in sports right now, in sport media, and one is the use of AI. And so I showed them like how a podcast can work using AI. And I assumed they knew, and my class did not know. So initially there was like a pushback, like, oh, it sounds fake. I was like, all right, so let's add like another analyst to the conversation. Oh, let's like ask questions to it. And that step just changed the class. And it was kind of like an oh crap moment. Which I assumed, again, like I assumed they knew that. And so at the same time, I think for them, might have been like, well, is this like going to replace my 4 years of studies here? And what does this mean? So I think instead of like fearing it, it's like understanding the lengths that it can go, and understanding how do we respond as a society, but at the individual level, how are we responding to this? Because it's not going to go away by simply like saying it's awful and so forth. The reality is, prior to AI, students we know were cheating and often cheating because of like time constraints and so forth. This makes it a lot easier. And so us saying at that point, don't cheat, like didn't stop it from happening. And at the same time, like don't use it to generate your essay. But what if you flipped it on its head and said like, all right, let's critique what AI pushed out. Like what's the weaknesses and strengths? Now we're changing how we're teaching students to learn. The other side to this that I struggle with is just more the tax on our climate, which no one really talks about. You know, the fact that, you know, it takes less energy to use Google than it is to use AI, right? So what's the incentive to get more people to do that, because that requires less cost of energy and water usage and so forth. Hamilton just went through this big push against like having a data center put into the town. Everybody's using AI. Nobody wants it in their backyard. And you know, the idea that possibly, you know, by 2030, the constraint that it can have on our climate. That to me is the concern. And so when I'm like bantering with it as a research assistant, I'm also in the back of my head thinking like, geez, like it's pretty cool that it gave me some ideas here, but what did that cost our world to do that? And so I think that's one of the questions that I don't think we're having enough of a discussion of, but I think it should be front and center, and maybe thinking in terms of like responsible use of AI. But I think it's going to become a really strong topic, certainly in the near future, if it isn't already happening. Okay.
Thank you, Nicole. You brought up a few good points that I wanted to go back. Like, first of all, I wanted to ask you, for that podcast, which tools did you use? Did you use?
Yeah, I use Notebook LLM,
Notebook LLM.
right? It's
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, because in TMU, we have access to the Google suites. So Notebook LLM is doing a good job. And that example for the students is very interesting, because it kind of crosses between generative AI and agentic AI, because you can actually assign some work to individual people in that podcast. So if you are not familiar with Notebook LM, it has this feature that you feed it a lot of information, and it kind of synthesizes and digests and give it back to you in a format that you would like. One of those formats is a podcast. So you could actually just, instead of the reading of the article, it will put voice to it, and it provides different perspective on that same topic. So you can actually have somebody pro that argument and someone against it, and make the conversation and kind of use the models to help you understand the topic better. So for students, that's a very, very good use of a model. But also, you brought up a few other good points that I think it is a little bit out of the scope of our panel in terms of the use of the data centers, well, the computational use of water and energy that the generative AI or even Google has some part of it. It's just what Richard was mentioning, that the opportunity cost, that what are you willing to sacrifice for the convenience that you're getting from it. But also, it kind of what you mentioned about the brainstorming and using it as kind of a research assistant, which I think pretty much all of us use that quite often. And we are pretty comfortable working with the students, so we know when to push back and probe more to make sure we are getting kind of the right result. But that kind of brings me to the next question that I want to pass along to our panel, which is the tools are definitely spitting out outcomes, right? They give us images, text blocks, even music pieces. But there is a whole world of non-generative system-based AI used for sorting, predicting, or filtering data. In your creative practices, where do you see the boundary between using AI as a generator, a tool that makes a thing, versus using AI as a collaborator or system tools, predicting patterns, analyzing structure, and manipulating data arrays. So I wanted to pass this along to the panel, starting with Lorena. And I know you have slides. Feel free to use or not use. That's totally fine. But let's get started. And I'm hoping that we could hear from other people as well about the generative being generative as opposed to being a collaboration, which I think most of us are kind of moving towards.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lorena Escandon. I'm a professor with the School of Creative Industries and the graduate program director for the Master of Digital Media. And I love this question because when I was doing my PhD many years ago, my whole thesis was on how we could use information, patent mining, text mining, to support idea generation and problem solving. So my role has always been that of helping others come up with ideas, solve problems by using information and new technology. So when AI came out, it was very analogous to what I had already been doing for many years, which was identifying where are those areas where the technology can actually support and enable and give affordances to users when they're tasked with a problem. So a lot of problems with artists is, for example, the blank page syndrome, right? So you don't know where to start, you don't know what you're doing, and you just have this like, okay, I need to start. So information, because it is based on the history of human knowledge, right? So we have now at our fingertips all of the human knowledge that we have archived or digitized. And so that's where computers and these networks will go and look at, okay, what has been done before here? And it helps, like we said, it can be a collaborator. It can be a starting point to explore. So that's one of the areas where, as an artist, I don't want artists to just take the work of AI and be like, okay, that's my work. But it is a process where it can help you explore new avenues. If you're thinking like, oh, I'm doing this, where can I go? So what are some of unexplored areas? What are some hints of pathways that I haven't explored? So as a collaborator, I think that's a very useful tool. And that's where I want always to remind our students and artists, it's a tool. It's not, it should not be, this is the analogy that I used in a article that I wrote last year. When cameras came out, it didn't replace painters. We still have painters. It's, 200 years later, and we still have people who are painting. So even though we have a camera that actually will take it's pixel by pixel, you have the exact image that you want to capture, it doesn't stop human creativity. And people who use a camera know that it is a tool that enables your creativity and your vision. So even if we all have access to the same cameras on our on our phones. What makes an artist is that vision, that unique perspective of a human lived experience. And a camera will never wake up and be like, oh, I want to capture the sunset. A tool doesn't want things, and a tool doesn't bring that human experience that connects us with the art. So creative technologies are great at democratizing access to some of the things that we want to do. For example, a lot of my students will work with new technologies that maybe they don't have a lot of experience in. So coming in and saying, I want to make a physical controller, but I don't know how to use Arduino. So I'm using AI to troubleshoot, to come up with ideas and to explore. And okay, I'm having problems here. Where do I go? What information do I need to make this work the way that I want it to work? So the human input into whatever the person's doing, that I think has a lot of value. So we need to make sure that we understand what the tools are doing, where the information is coming from, the impact that we're having. So I agree with Nicole, we don't talk enough about the ecological impact that this is having. So having those conversations with our students and asking them to be judicious and like, why are you using this? Is this something that you can do on your own? Or is this something that's really going to be useful for your work? Is it going to help you overcome an obstacle that will then enable your work in other ways? So I don't recommend that students use it for everything. It's more about where is it going to add value and where is it going to make a difference in what I'm doing? And I'll give an example in my own research. So I have this database of job board postings for people in creative sectors. And we were trying to look at EDI language, so how it's evolved, how we're using it right now. And we had a problem with, is this part of a EDI statement that the company is putting in the job posting, or is it something that is embedded as part of the actual job description? And with 15,000, 20,000 job descriptions, it was not humanly possible to do this in a short amount of time. But I can train an AI into saying, this is what an EDI statement looks like. Find which one of these, so out of the 15,000, how many are EDI statements that the company has added to the job description and how many are within the job description. So it is something that adds value to the work that I'm doing, and it's not taking away from my responsibility as a researcher in what I want to do in my ideas into what the study should be or should do. So in that vein, that's where I feel like we can use AI responsibly and for things that help us jump obstacles and help us go faster, but without taking the eye off of what is it that I as a human being want to do.
Amazing. Thank you, Lorena. Was there any other examples that you find as a collaborator, anybody else on the panel who wanted to elaborate on? While you're thinking, I just wanted to talk about one other example. I want to be explicit about the tools. So if any of you, so I'm also from media production, and in the sandbox, thanks to our experts, we actually have a few out-of-the-box solutions for people to use, and one of those it's called Invoke. It's an image generation software. It was originally open source, but then it got acquired. The web base of it, it's still available for free if you ever want to use it. And it basically just generates images. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen this already, that earlier versions of the models were not that great at creating accurate images. They have humans with 6 fingers on one hand and like strange things that just happens in an image. But those models, those initial iterations may not be as good, but they have evolved and it gotten a lot better, to the extent that some of our faculties in even production and film programs are starting to use those models and ask them to do smaller pieces of their films. And the reason I'm mentioning this is that, again, they are the creators, they are giving the vision and the prompt to the AI model. But the reason these newer models are really useful for people who are entering the market is that previously, doing any kind of visual effects, or if you wanted to shoot a movie in a airport or on a sea, it would have been impossible. But now you can kind of create a lot of the background on location using a proper model that you have specifically trained it on. And then it kind of reduces the barrier to entry. Yes, you might not win an Oscar with it, but you can actually create a decent outcome, shorter amount of movie, or do, as AJ was mentioning, is as an editing tool to make it more accessible to a lot of people who may not have access to it before. Again, it does not remove that creative vision of an artist, and it also does not remove the critical skill of an artist who actually needs to still oversee a lot of the output that comes out of any of these models, but it allows you to change things more quickly and experiment. Maybe this lighting wouldn't work. Maybe that background fits better. Maybe this tone of color would work better. Maybe AJ, you elaborate on that lighting experiment. What specific tools did you use to actually allow those changes?
So for those students, thanks for the question. For those students, they were using the image generation tools inside of ChatGPT. They were also, a few of them were more intrepid and were using Comfy UI, which is something that's available localized, also available in the Creative AI Sandbox. Hint, hint. I think that this is one of the things, again, I talked about drudgery before, but also I think it's connecting all pieces that you may have missed before. So for example, throwing in a data set of all these photos that you've gone on vacation for. You might have these different things through iCloud and iPhotos or through Google Photos, depending on what your platform is of choice. But being able to do that on your own personally is also really valuable, because you can see it might detect maybe you have a pattern that you really enjoy this particular time period to take photos at, or these kinds of scenes or these kinds of things. And you might see those things organically, but most of the time you might miss those patterns. So I think that's really valuable too as well. I also think, for example, chapters. For example, if you've listened to podcasts, which I'm sure many of you have, or maybe you've created a podcast using Notebook LM, having those chapter moments is sometimes difficult to go through and catalog. Using a transcription software that is localized, you can generate those bookmarks very quickly, which is super great to be able to mobilize that knowledge much more further. I'll also speak to some of the other collaborator examples that people have brought up here. I think about, for example, when it's prioritization. If I can figure out, okay, which grant or which particular academic journal I need to aim for, or which particular things, what should I be looking at? It feels like you have to, you're drinking from a fire hose sometimes with the amounts of information you're taking in. And so being able to have an extra process with a human in the loop that is verifying what things are going on, it becomes a huge value point, because I can look at this and be like, okay, I can categorize this and also have this generate me a calendar so I can start following this as effectively as possible. So I enjoy using those use cases. Obviously, there's the cheating examples that people know of, but I think I would also say one of the other things I've seen with students is that it uses them using as tutors. And so I think, for example, when you're coming into a new concept with new information, it can be very difficult to know where to start or even what pieces you're missing. And so having a system that you can have a conversation with by either feeding it a PDF of knowledge that you know is valuable and accurate, that can be something super valuable. And I think that's something that I've been exploring personally. Other people have as well. My students certainly have. And I think it's so great, because all of a sudden people who may have been locked off through no fault of their own, just circumstances of their lives, they didn't have access to that knowledge, and they didn't have the the capability to have the education to be able to understand it. Now they have that ability. So I think that's something I really like, especially if you're in that creative sector. You're probably dabbling in a lot of different things and you want to learn a bunch of things as well. So you can't spend all the time in the world figuring out all the little pieces to get to where you need to go. Having something that curates that list of where you should start first for that educational path is super valuable.
Before we move on to our next question, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add a note that I heard someone else say, and I quite agree with it. The idea that you don't, if you're thinking of it as a collaborator, having it do something that, having AI do something that you can't do yourself. Meaning the idea that if you're collaborating with it, maybe has like an assistant or going through like a lot of documents, that you still at the end of the day you could have done it yourself. It would have taken you like many more days to have done it in the seconds that it could have done, but you could have done it. Versus if you don't have the skill to understand how to decipher what's a good study versus what's not a good study. Likewise, if you're using it to help you generate like a creative idea, you could have gotten to it eventually with enough time and effort. But if you don't have that within your wheelhouse, then maybe like AI is sometimes not like the best tool, because you're not necessarily going to have the ability to decipher when it's made an error. So I could have it compile something related to like aerospace engineering. That's not my area of expertise. I can't say if this is false or this is correct. So maybe in that sense, I might be better off to defer to another aspect for getting that information, versus if I had this, if that's my area and I'm trying to narrow down like which areas that I want to focus on with whatever data set and so on. So just like that thought, like, is this something that I could have done myself? Then yeah, then you can use AI like as a collaborator versus it being something that you couldn't have done. What's that?
Thank you. So I know we are kind of running out of time. I would like to open it up before, like I do have a couple of more questions to go through, but I wanted it open up to the to the audience to ask questions first, and then we come back to the ones that we have already. I will bring a microphone so that people can hear you.
Thank you very much for this really great panel. My question comes from, hi, Wendy. I'm one of the LASOs, and maybe you covered this earlier, and I came in late from North York, so I'm with North York Arts, and my question really is around when we're doing calls for artists, and what are our guidelines or our policies around what people submit, and how do we evaluate? I was going to give it to you, Wendy.
That's a great question, a huge one, and of course, so many organizations. I'm sure you've encountered every possible answer to that question in the policies of something you're interacting with, from nothing at all, nowhere, anywhere should AI be any part of something, you must sign something, which of course becomes very difficult when it's built into, Grammarly, it's built into the edit text, it's built into everything, all the way through to wide open. I guess there isn't really going to be an answer other than that I can think of from my point of view, other than being intentional about it. So what I think may happen is we may get organizations, we may get competitions, we may get venues or festivals that have a particular stance. And that's the kind of work they want to show. Just like there may be a silent film festival and there may be someplace else that is for action films. You will get different, I don't think there's any coordination across the councils in terms of what they support, as far as I know, in terms of previous work, what kinds of work they want to support. We may see things around the writing of grants, but as you say, I think a lot of people are writing the heart of a grant themselves, and then they feel like, well, there's 7 other questions that are reworking, but for the Ontario Arts Council, they need this many words, and for the Canada Council, it needs this many words of the same concept, so I will just feed it in and have it rewrite it in that, and it saves a lot of time. Some councils may not allow that. They may try, and I don't know how they'll detect it, but they may just ask you to testify that you did not do this. But I do think we're going to see a range of approaches, and I think individual artists will make a choice. I think individual funders will make a choice, and audiences will make a choice. There are already films. There's a two AI films that I know of. One was at Cannes, one was at Tribeca. And one of them is an all-action, and the other is a very personal documentary style a piece by taking place in Iran. And they didn't have access, they couldn't get to that location. Historically, they didn't have a lot of media, and they're very different philosophical approaches, but they're both complex. Documentary, generating something with AI from documentary means it's no longer a document of actuality. It is created, so it's challenging there. But they also said, this democratized my access. I could tell a story, and in a way that I couldn't. I didn't have access to a full set and a full crew. So I think there's arguments to be made, and I think we are just going to make choices because now, at least from a media point of view, we're in a media abundance. There's not scarcity in that. There's scarcity in so many things, but we are now in a time of abundance in terms of media and how things are made, going to have to just make choices. And for a while, certainly for the next few years, it's just going to be very difficult because there's not going to be a clear answer. Somebody will apply for something and then be told after the fact, actually, you're disqualified. And that's going to be terrible, but I don't think that will last forever.
I wanted to add to that because we are facing the same issue in academia. And at some universities, I hope that's not the case here, but there are places where students are noticing that the professor is generating the assignment with ChatGPT, and then the student generates the assignment with ChatGPT, and then the instructor grades the assignment with ChatGPT. So it's just models doing everything with, feeding each other information. And so here's where what AJ was saying, the human in the loop, right? So as arts organizations, you can have guidelines as to what the acceptable level of use can be. For example, can I collaborate with it to come up with an idea, for example? But then I drafted the poetry or, and then who is on the other side reviewing the work and giving feedback? And can the artist stand by their work and explain the meaning of it? Because as I mentioned, the AI doesn't have an experience. If I ask for a poem, where is that coming from? And can I, or a photograph that could be very easily digitized or improved or edited with an AI, and it could be improved somehow, but then what does that mean for the artist? How am I going to present my work and how you as an audience or a panel is trying to connect with it? So I feel like that's where we need to be careful about us as well as evaluators and what we are expecting to see and what we're considering as this is good work or not. There have been studies where they've shown people poetry generated by AI and poetry generated by a human person, and they can't tell, right? So who is the person reviewing that? And can I, as an expert in poetry, say, am I connecting with this? Does this make sense? Or is it just a word salad that something came up with? So it's that, we can't lose the humanity and we can't lose that side of, it's we can't be just AIs exchanging information for a grade.
I would just add one more point because you mentioned evaluation. And I know, yes, we have been experiencing the guideline and policy piece, especially through universities and grant agencies and journal publications. So they kind of give us a guideline you can or you cannot use. But I think, especially in the creative industries, we will see and we're almost there, not quite, but we will see new field of studies, new fields maybe AI film would not compete in the same vein with with other films, but we will have AI film festivals, right? They just compete with their own brand, and we will have creatives who actually develop this kind of an interdisciplinary skill that you're not necessarily doing all the production pieces yourself. You're actually collaborating with AI to do some of those things, and it becomes a different category. To go back to the comparison of the painting and the photography, now we will have the next generation which is kind of an AI generator. And the reason I'm saying this, we are heading that way. I am already hearing from a lot of the industry companies that they are starting to hire AI producers, right? Like that is becoming a job function that you're not just a producer anymore. You are actually specialized in AI production. And the reason they're going that way, obviously, it's not because AI is creating better videos or better films. It's an efficiency, right? For certain use cases, the threshold is lower. So you can actually use other tools to generate, like in certain type of marketing, maybe you don't need that much of a creativity of an original story, but a variation of certain things that has been created, you could potentially adapt it using an AI tool. So I think it will, in terms of evaluation, we might actually need to create a separate category evaluating things that are generated by AI. Maybe not academically, because everybody uses it the same way. For students, because the student use case are different, because they are at the start of their careers and they're developing skills. So it's a very different method that as faculty we use it, because we want the student to develop a specific skill, so they should not use AI for that. But when you're in the real world and you're deciding between the money that you can spend on something that versus another, those decisions like really drive where you are allowing qualities that are provided by AI generated videos or audios or and a human creator. Other questions from the audience? Yes. Thank you.
Hi, I have 12 more questions. How do we make AI music? How do we make AI cover tunes? How do we make AI parodies? How do we make AI videos? Which AI programs, music programs should we use? Which AI video programs should we use? Are there any AI music or video courses, not Zoom, real courses? How do I own copyright on my AI content? Can I hire an AI music or video expert? Are there AI creative grants in Ontario? Do SOCAN or Factor deal with AI? And are there AI music books? Thanks.
All great questions. And I think the answer to a lot of them are yeses. Except I think the no is the maybe is more on the copyright front that I would not elaborate on. I'll punt that to the future panels. But in terms of specific tools, we mentioned a couple of tools that we are using in our sandbox, which is the Invoke is out there. Like all these, so for example, Google has the Gemini and it has Nano Banana to create images. That's the specific model that they would use. But I will before I pass it to specific tools, I just want to also show you that if you really want to just start from somewhere with the tools. So again, this document that is on our page, the Creative AI Clinic, if you open it, it does have some of the typical tools that we have, like a Comfy UI, Invoke, Rue for music, like Ace Step. but also you can find more information on the Sandbox page that gives you a little bit more specifics. But I know we on the panel we have both Richard and AJ. Yeah, go ahead, either one.
Okay, I'll jump in a bit. So the first question you have to ask yourself is, what do you want that is going to be given directly into the cloud and you're generating from the cloud versus what you want localized? And then the localization thing, it means, do you have a powerful enough computer to be able to do these actions, to be able to pull that off? When it comes to cloud services in the sound generation space, Suno AI is the big name at the moment. They're pretty good. And it actually kind of terrifies me because I know a set of people that have kind of just gone in this direction where they just listen to music that is AI generated. So they have like no shared commonalities of like knowing who Shania Twain is or Sarah McLachlan or any other artists because they're just listening to this AI generated version of the world that they enjoy. So it opens up new paradigms to explore, and I'll let other academics explore that space. But Suno is the big one. There's a lot of local models also in that space that also use the Comfy UI engine. So if you're looking in that space, that's one to look at as well. That is also very popular on the video side, but I would also say on the video side, Runway and ML is kind of really big in that space. There's been some other spaces as well. Again, when it comes to video generation, I find it questionable at best, usually kind of garbage. Even the best models that I've seen right now, they don't generate the same kinds of work that I would expect to be at a high level, professional level. It usually just fools people who think it's going to be at that same professional level that they're looking for, unless it's a highly stylized look that they're looking for, that they're aiming, in which case it does a pretty good job. So I would look at those services, but I would also say like the thing that I find is best is that not to use those services directly. I would use them as like starting points. So for example, if you wanted to create AI generated video of some kind, or you have a specific vision in mind, use it to generate a specific scene so you can get like a concept art or a concept version of it so that way you can push forward. Even with Suno, I find it can, like, let's say I put in like a prompt that says, I want a country version of how this talk was awesome with Art Etopico. You can get that, and that would be generated, but also I feel like it misses the point of what great art is. If you start off with like, I'm looking for ideas for lyrics, but I have this melody and I'm not sure how to mix it together, and you use different tools to kind of build it, I think the human then is much more interesting. It creates something much more interesting because of that collaboration, that creative tension. So again, those are some of the services. I'm not sponsored by any of those people. I'll pass it off to Richard for more.
That's all great. My first question for you to think about would be, with that list of questions and list of areas you're interested in, is how little or how much do you want to do in that? So some of the tools that AJ was talking about, like Suno.ai in music, you take a prompt. You say, make music that's 3.5 minutes long, that sounds like Shania. I mean, I think in some of them you can't say specific musicians, but you would describe, I want it to sound country, I want it to fill a bed track in my movie that is, I want something, and I'm showing some B-roll of an intro to a city, and so I want something like this, and I want it to sound a little like this, and it will just make it. In other tools, you want a back and forth. You actually want to have control. You actually want to be able to edit and get in there and say, this part I want to be a little bit differently, but I'm going to use different tools. And those are very different tools. But AI is built into Adobe Photoshop. It's being built into After Effects. It's built into a lot of the traditional tools, depending on what form you work in. It's being built into music editing tools. The question is, do you want it to just generate from scratch, or do you want to get in and have something that's modifiable? And the amazing thing is, some of these don't require you. Like learning a new music editing software can be hard, right? The specifics are different in one tool versus another. I'm used to using, maybe Audacity, or I'm used to using, a standard tool, and I'm stuck into one place. A lot of these interfaces text, so I can say, show me how to do this, or do a little of this. And this taps into what AJ said. Your questions, ask an AI tool, but ask it in a very specific way. Say, here's my skill level. I'm new to this, or I'm an expert in music editing using traditional tools, or I'm a live musician, but I'm interested in this, so I want you to do this. I want you to show your references for things I can find that are an intro level, and here's the task I want. So set yourself a little project. I want to write a piece of music this length in this style that combines my own instruments with something maybe on the edit side, or maybe it's adding a drum track. Ask it, and then ask it, find me these tutorials, and then the amazing thing is it will help you when you get stuck in the tutorial, because the tutorial doesn't cover the version you have with the laptop you have that's broken in this way. And so you can then start to ask in this back and forth. It's very good at teaching you this way, and it will do that in the middle of the night. It will do that because it never gets bored. So I think that's the way. And then you will be left with a decision. Do I like this process, or is it interfering with my own creative process? Am I willing to modify in these ways? And you will find versions of tools that can work in the way you want. If not, some of the tools we were talking about, Nano Banana, these others, they're very fire and forget. But there are other ones where you can draw, you can modify, you can change, and that might be the level you're interested in. Those are not quite as sophisticated, but there are a lot you can try for free or try for very cheap that don't require you to.
I'm just going to plug our programs because there was a question in there about education. As AJ's giving me a thumbs up, because yes, we do teach those kinds of things here at the Creative School. So a lot of us teach courses where there is AI. Richard is actually teaching an AI in creative work in the winter. So if you happen to apply to one of our programs, look into our courses, our course calendars. We do have the equipment, we have laboratories, we have faculty and instructors who will be able to help you realize those projects that you want to build. There are courses, not just here. I feel like a lot of the colleges also will be offering some sort of program, depending on what is you specifically asked about music, but if you are in video production, in photography, I feel like we are all, because of how big it's become, we are all trying to integrate the different tools into our educational programs.
I just wanted to go back to our poll. I see one question there, and I kind of is aligned with the last question that I was going to ask about the advice for people who are in the space or have been around in the space or new to the space in any creative industries. What kind of advice do you have more concretely for them to stay relevant? Yes, by letting, and this specific one is what students or artists are missing experiences or skills by letting the AI to generate content or products that traditionally were made by humans. So any of the panelists can touch on it. Yes, go ahead.
I have one, and I hope you have more. Conflict and problem solving. So when we work with other human beings, there's usually different perspectives. And like Nicole mentioned, AI tends to be very sycophantic. So there's not a lot of spark in there that arises from two different perspectives clashing. And then us trying to figure out as human beings, like how do we get to a place where we can both, be invested in this thing we're doing. And I always think about the Queen movie where they're, in that retreat and they're trying to figure out a song and they're fighting, and that's where the creative spark. So I love that scene because it does demonstrate that creative spark, that when you bring different perspectives and you're all experts in, for example, music, and you're trying to work through that conflict, and that sparks innovation. So that's where I feel like there's a lot of creativity theories that talk about how that conflict really is the spark of innovation. So I think that's one of the biggest problems that I'm hoping we will keep somehow. So it's one of the experiences that I think we'll be missing.
I really love what Lorena said. I'm going to take it a little bit further, and I think it's really important to fail. I feel like it's really important to not be good at something and to keep pursuing it. That persistence really does matter. I think failure is the price of admission to greatness in any format, and especially in the creative pursuits. And I think knowing where you are, that struggle, that's part of the process. That's the enjoyable part, especially when you're first starting out. You don't realize it when you're doing it, but when you finally are getting it, you realize, oh, I got better at these things, but also there are new problems to address. There are new things. it's that tension that allows you to build up that muscle to be able to continue to push forward with your creative pursuit, where you won't be pushed aside by whatever life throws at you. You'll continue to be creative. And so that's what concerns me with these tools, is because, again, I don't have to figure out what I need for dinner. AI can just solve that for me, right? It removes that particular friction. Maybe that's a good friction for you to have removed. But when it comes to creative work, or it comes to anything that I think is worth great as a title next to it, it's got to have that resistance, that failure, in fact. And I think burning off those failures is a huge part of the process that is missing when it comes to these conversations about AI. And I encourage you all to have fun with AI, but fail with AI too, and learn from it, and then keep building and pushing forward from there.
Couldn't agree more with both of those points. The one I wanted to add, there's Bill Buxton here in Toronto, writes a lot about the value of sketching. And a sketch is not like a crappy version of the final product because you couldn't do the final version yet. Sketching, it has its own value. A sketch is like an abstraction of a thing. It's where you start, you try ideas out on your way to, and maybe failing and trying a lot of different things, and you can maybe show it to yourself and look and see what you did. You can show it to other people, and they can comment on the base idea of it. If you jumped all the way to a beautiful final rendering, people will say, well, I don't like that font, or I don't like that color, when the real feedback you need is, I don't like that idea, but it looks too good. It looks too polished. The point is to have a rough version when my idea is a rough version, because then I can work it until I'm ready to go to the next step. It's not a lame intermediary, it's necessary. And the challenge we get is AI jumps to that polish immediately, so that students, Ira Glass talks about this. He says, like, when you first start out making things, your taste is very well developed, because that's why you decided you want to be a writer or a painter or a musician. Your taste is very well developed, but your skill is low. So you make stuff that suck, and then you think, oh, this is terrible, I'm terrible, I don't want to do it anymore. And you got to push past that, just like AJ was saying. And I worry that AI lets people jump to a thing that looks very polished without any of the pushing through to train themselves up, to train their ideas, to make their ideas better. And that's a huge mistake. There's also an economist who talks about the idea of premium mediocrity. And that we're living in a world where we have like a pretty great looking version of something that is fundamentally not a good idea. Like premium economy, he talks about, implying premium economy. It's like a polished, crappy thing. And I think AI is giving us polished, kind of crappy things sometimes. A logo, I got a logo. I want like a video edit, I got a video edit. It has explosions in it. Is there a human idea that touches other people? I don't know. It jumped past that to something that looks like I'm used to seeing in a movie theater, but with none of the heart, which is the point of something getting to there. And so it makes some things too easy and prevents us from doing hard things when we need to.
I'm just going to build off of that, try and keep it short. For my students who have me in all my other classes except for Capstone, I actually require them it's a technology-free classroom. And so that means that they have to, all of their assessments are done in class by hand. They have to take notes by hand and so forth. And the reason is because I have like Capstone's different, like we're going off in the real world and so forth. But the other classes, according to Bloom's taxonomy of learning, there's certain things that I'm wanting my students to get when they come out of the classroom. And there's been enough research that have shown that you learn a lot more when you write by hand versus when you type, because when you're typing, you're just transcribing. When you write by hand, you have to go through a coding process and kind of make sense of what someone has said, and then turn it into meaning for yourself, and then write it onto your paper. So there's this extra step of learning that you, much like using AI, you skip if you type. And by doing that, my test scores have gone quite up through the roofs by forcing my students to write by hand and take notes by hand and do assessments that way. I think that's part of what's being said here. Failure is such, I couldn't agree with you more, AJ, on that. That is the most important ingredients for success. And something that plays out in the back of my head is my husband's in the world of business and so forth, and what he's seeing is that industries that are using a lot of AI are now having to throttle it down because they've got to pay for credit, right? And so they have to pay per month for their employees to use AI, and then if they go over that, then they got to pay more, and it's millions and millions of dollars. And so there's almost it creates if you think about it, like AI creates like this dopamine effect, makes us want more and more, and you've got this like loop. But on the other side of it, if it creates dependency on it, like, you know, they're benefiting from like the financial rewards, but then if we don't know how, we don't own the skills as to how to adjust when we don't have AI, what's that cost, right? So you still have to know how to fish, and you can't like depend on someone giving you fish to be successful. So I'd say like that cost is like, how much is it taking away from your skill of learning? And I just go back to that idea that if you can do what you're asking AI to do by hand or by digitally, then you know you're probably okay. But if you're using it because you don't know how to do it, and you're shortcutting that process, then you might end up with some problems, if not immediately, but down the road.
Thank you. Yes.
So for example, when the iPhone came out and digital cameras, everyone thought they could make photography. Everyone can do their own work. We don't need to pay a photographer. And then, of course, we eventually figured out, well, no, photographers actually have a lot of knowledge, have a lot of artistry to put together that photo. But of course, it dilutes what we do end up seeing because there's so much out there. And then I've always been worried with Google Maps. What happens if Google Maps goes down? I feel like there's an entire generation that has no idea spatially how the different streets actually interconnect with each other to be able to get somewhere anymore. And so that actually worries me as well.
Yes, great point. Absolutely. So basically, to summarize the points is that, again, AI looks like a different tool. It has disrupted a lot of the workflows that we have been using. But again, it's not, as we've discussed, it's not magic. It's based on patterns. And it's up to the creators to decide whether that output is relevant or good enough. So what I recommend to all of our students and also artists in any field is that you really, really have to still keep honing on that specific niche skill that you have, because in the age of AI, what matters is that taste that you mentioned, like that differentiation between what is good and what is not good, because AI can generate a lot of the stuff. So the advice is usually on still keep getting really, really good at the critical skill that you have in your own discipline, because that is always the winner, no matter what type of AI it's out there for you to use. It just helps entering certain areas that you might not previously able to enter. But a lot of great advice from everybody else. I don't know if anybody wanted to add anything. Otherwise, I'll just wrap it at this, because I know we are a little bit over time, but we will be around if you have more questions to discuss. Happy to answer them individually. Otherwise, thank you very much.